In episode 9, the sheriff wants John to radio for help, but Ward ends up getting that radio. Ward tells Rafe to take his sister home. Of course, she doesn't want to go. She wants to make sure the sheriff gets help. But when it becomes apparent she doesn't have a choice, he tells John to run, and he does. So Rafe takes Sarah home, and Ward ends up radioing for help. But as he's doing so, he's also uncuffing himself so he doesn't look guilty. After he does this, he radios for another pilot to come and fly his plane to the Bahamas. And as the group is waiting for John B. to arrive, they see that plane take off and they know the gold is gone. And when this happens, Pope ends up smashing everything he can see with a baseball bat. JJ feels like this is the best time to introduce him to weed, and Key is urging him not to do it because it's just not him, but he looks at Key and says, I lost my scholarship. I walked out in the interview. It's gone. And starts blazing up. John shows up mid-puff and lets the group know what happened. Now, the cop does show up at the airstrip to assist and immediately asks Ward who did it, and he blames it on John B. They can't wait for an ambulance and have to transport the sheriff to the hospital themselves. And as they wheel her into the emergency room, the cop looks at Ward and says, we're going to get this guy. And the cop is very emotional watching the sheriff go in. When Ward gets home, he's washing the blood off his hands, and his wife asks whose blood that is. And it doesn't take too many questions for Ward to blow up on her. He goes up to talk to Rafe and lets Rafe know that the sheriff is dead, and he put the blame on John B., and Rafe thinks that's a great idea. But he says now the person we need to worry about is Sarah because she's got a big mouth. But Ward assures him that Sarah won't be talking, and when Rafe tries to argue with him, he flips out on him as well. John feels like he needs to go tell the cops what happened, but when he walks in the station, he overhears on the radio that he is the prime suspect, and he runs out. He hops in the car and tells Key to floor it, and they narrowly escape. But they now know that John is the prime suspect. And because of this, the cops have put a $25,000 bounty on his head and also closed the ferry and the road so that he can't leave the island. Although he doesn't know this. And Pope thinks that that's the place to go, the ferry. We'll get him off the island and he'll be good to go. But when they go to the ferry, they learn that it's closed, and they learn about the bounty, and Pope brings back the flyer to the car and shows them. As they're trying to get out of there, somebody spots John B., another person spots John B., and now a crowd is forming, and Pope, who is still high, mind you, ends up crashing into a couple cars and escaping. He decides to drop John off so John can get away and they'll distract the cops. But his shitty driving is too much for Key, and she ends up taking the wheel because he's so messed up. He asks where they're going, and she says the one place where nobody would suspect. And that's the Cameron household. Well, Ward Cameron has locked Sarah into her bedroom. When Wheezy wants to know why she's locked in the bedroom, Ward yells at her and tells her to go to her room, and she can't figure out why she's being punished. Now, she doesn't go to her room initially and sees her brother packing up a bunch of John B. stuff and wants to know why, and her brother lets her know that John B. is the one who killed the sheriff. So when the group arrives at the Cameron household, they need a plan to get to Sarah. And as Key and Pope are walking up to the house, Pope thinks it's now a good time to tell Key that he loves her. She says, you're just high. And he says, I am, and that's probably why I'm telling you. I'm in love with you. And Key says, thank you very much. It's very sweet of you, but it's never going to happen. And she tries nicely to let him down, but obviously he's hurt. You girls are ruthless out there. And the plan is to draw Ward out of the house by lighting his grill on fire, and that's Pope's job. Key, meanwhile, will sneak up to Sarah's bedroom and talk to her. And Pope does his job, and it works. And Key goes up to Sarah's bedroom, but the window is locked. And Key shows Sarah the bounty flyer, and Sarah says, I don't know anything about it. John, meanwhile, is trying to evade the cops any way he can and ends up running into a random person's garage. But when the cops get pretty close, he ends up going into the house. And when he does this, he ends up seeing one of Rafe's friends. And that's when he knows he's in deep shit. Because this guy doesn't want to hear anything that John B. is peddling. John tries to run away, but ends up accidentally running into the laundry room and locking himself in there, and he's trapped. And at first, this guy's really pissed off, but then he thinks, oh my God, there's a $25,000 bounty. I'm going to go get the cops. And he has Topper, of all people, make sure that John B. doesn't get out. And Topper isn't really concerned with the fact that John is wanted right now for murder. He's more concerned with the fact that John is Mr. Steal Your Girl. And John apologizes for going after Sarah even though he knew that Topper was dating her. And they get into an argument about who loves her more. And John does admit that he does love her. But all Topper really wants to talk about in this conversation is Sarah and how the chickens are coming home to roost for John. And it doesn't take long for the kid to reach the cops. I don't know why he just didn't use his cell phone anyway. And the cops immediately surround his place and a crowd forms. And in that crowd is Rafe, who is urging the cops to go get him. Because he wants John B. gone no matter what. Preferably dead so he can't ever tell the truth. Now, Rafe's sister is trying to figure out a way out. And she remembers that she snuck the cup that's attached to the wire that you used as a kid. And the other end is connected to Wheezy's bedroom. She convinces Wheezy to come in even though her dad told her not to. And as soon as she gets her in, she explains to her that John did not kill the sheriff. But she doesn't tell Wheezy who did. She says, I need you to cover for me as long as possible, and she bikes off to try to find John. But John is stuck in that laundry room, but when the cops go and open the door, John is snuck out via the vent. So now the entire neighborhood is out there looking for John, figuring he can't get far away, and John uses diversion and runs the other way. Now Sarah figures he probably went to that abandoned sex pad, that church, and she is right. But unbeknownst to her, she's being followed by Topper. And she shows up and there's John, but right behind her is Topper. And Topper tries to warn everybody of John B.'s location by ringing the church bells, but John gets him to stop, and Sarah explains to him who actually killed the sheriff. It was my brother Rafe. She goes on to say, why would I rat my brother out? It's my own brother and it's my dad. That's what happened. And Topper is starting to believe it. But his church bell message worked, and the cops, along with Rafe, are heading over to the church. Now, Rafe and the other guy, who I'm not even going to look up his name, end up sneaking in the back of the church. And since Rafe just wants John B. dead, he ends up lighting the church on fire, unaware that his sister and Topper are up there with him. Now, Topper, being horrible with timing, figures this is the best opportunity to argue about who loves you more and says, I can prove it. So he actually switches outfits with John and goes out the front door and distracts the cops as John and Sarah run out the back. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.